Welcome to Murder Mile UK True Crime. This isn't a video, it's an audio experience. The only images you'll need for this episode are these. So close your eyes, open your mind, and savor the sounds of Murder Mile. Did Veronique finally find happiness, or vanish from existence? Find out on Murder Mile. Today, I'm standing on Rupert Street in Soho, W1. One street east of Harry Kimber, who murdered his newborn child. One street west of the unsolved murder of Camille Gordon. The same street as Larry Winter's wasted life. And one street south of the baffling porn theatre killing. Coming soon to Murder Mile. Rupert Street has been gentrified over the years. As Soho, or more precisely the council, tries to shake its image as a cesspit of seedy brothels and mucky bookshops where men in flashy macs stifle a bone. With the piddle and plop washed from the streets nightly, by morning, when the artisan food market opens, and Tarquin and Fenella sample a soupçon of East Asian curries, supposedly made by a 100-year-old monk from an ancient recipe, yet the website suggests his name is Tom, he has a hipster beard, and it was slopped from a vat in an exotic place called Wembley. Just as the giant dish of paella beside it looks fresh, but is as crunchy as a Krusty's knickers. Everything in life is part truth, part lie, and part mystery. Veronique was a woman, like so many who came to Soho, seeking an escape from the hardships they had lived, but found only a den of drugs, drink, depression, misery, pain, and violence. Her life was the epitome of tragic. And although we have few clues to where it began, like so many nameless women in her occupation who vanished never to be seen again, we have no idea where her life ended. My name is Michael, I'm your tour guide, and this is Murder Mile. Episode 351, The Ghost of Veronique. I first heard about Veronique a decade ago when I was a tour guide of Soho's murder sites. Like the Soho Strangler, locals told me the story, but I always believed it was a myth until I dug deeper. There were no written records of Veronique's life, as we have no idea who she truly was. So unlike other episodes of Murder Mile, this was compiled using reminiscences from those who knew her or say they knew her, so nothing should be taken as fact. Memories are subjective, and over time as the accuracy fades, details are shifted, rearranged, and adapted to suit biases and perspectives, so all that remains is a riddle. Where possible, I've sifted the more fanciful stories, given weight to the more plausible, and tried to tell a more logical side of her life by using similar tales from those in Veronique's predicament. But will we ever know the truth? As to many, she was a nothing and a nobody, to be used and abused. Her name, we think, was Veronique. It was said she was aged 18 to 21, but may have been younger. She was small, about 5'1" and slim-framed. She was a short-haired brunette, with a pixie-like nose, small ears, a smile who few ever saw, and she had a birthmark on her hip. She was neither pretty nor ugly, but unremarkable and forgettable. Born at the start of the 1920s, she was raised in a new era after the devastation of the First World War. With technology making lives better and education no longer for the wealthy, in a small way, women were finding freedom from the shackles of marriage, and ironically in this story, domestic slavery. Her English was limited, just a few words. But those who spoke to her said she spoke softly, and although she said she came from Versailles on the Paris outskirts, the French girls said it didn't match her accent. But this typified Veronique, an enigma who said very little about herself, her life, her family, and although she wore a crucifix and was often seen praying, Christianity seemed to be alien to her. Some girls gossiped that she may have been Jewish, and she hid it well because she had to. Fleeing everything she had known as the Nazis invaded Paris and France fell, knowing that if she stayed she would be beaten, raped, persecuted, hunted, and sent to a camp to be executed. She had to escape, no matter what. By the summer of 1940, when she crossed the mine-laden English Channel to seek sanctuary, what greeted her when she got to London was a smoke-wreathed city ablaze, eviscerated by blitz bombs, with many homes blasted to bits, body parts strewn across the streets, and millions evacuated. But for now, this hellhole of fire and death was a comparative haven. But her life was about to get worse. With no passport, no visa, and no one to protect her, this lone girl was in a world she didn't understand. And likely arriving illegally via a gang, they claimed that they could marry her to an Englishman for a fee. But as she had no money, few did, and they knew that. The marriage would be a sham, the Englishman would be a Maltese-born gangster, and she would be made to work to pay off the debt. Only the debt would never be paid off, and her misery would only end when she was exhausted, broke, or dead. Veronique, likely an easy-to-pronounce alias which hinted at her foreign mystique, like French Fifi or Dutch Leia, was married to a man called Frank. She barely knew him, she didn't like him, and she certainly didn't love him. To pacify him, she cooked and cleaned for this fat, foul-smelling yop who was drunk, aggressive, and treated her as cruelly as anyone may treat a rabid and rancid dog. But he didn't want her as a wife. As a young, slim, pretty brunette, Veronique was sold into sex work. If she refused, she was beaten. If she cried, she was beaten. And if she said no to a client's cruel demands, she was beaten. Her life would be spent, day and night, in a small dingy room on the upper floor of an unknown flat on Rupert Street, but also on Peter Street, Brewer Street, Archer Street, Tisbury Court, and many other dirty dens. Veronique never sold sex on the streets. She wasn't a familiar face among Soho's working girls, and so never had a criminal record. She lived like a prisoner in a small room lit by just a red lamp. With a drawer full of lube, condoms, and pornographic photos, she spent many long hours flat on her back on a manky mattress, as an endless slew of sex-starved soldiers sweated and grimaced over her motionless body. A blank expression on her face, a dead look in her eyes, and not a single utterance from her lips. She'd come to this country as a young woman fleeing tyranny, with still a single ounce of hope in her heart. But a few months in, she'd become a product, a commodity, and a hole to be pumped and paid for. She'd forgotten how to scream. Her tears no longer flowed. For fear of being beaten again, she only cried on the inside. And every night she wept silently, praying her pain would end, but knowing it wouldn't. She was broken, alone, afraid, and exhausted, unable to recall the girl she once was. And before too long, Veronique had become a ghost. Soho was the kind of place where dreams die, cruelty reigns, and then nobody could vanish without a trace. As being so transient, few stay for long, many have aliases, and their existence is only recorded when they're arrested for illicit reasons, which as far as we know, she never was, being so well hidden. But what happened to Veronique? Did she die? Was she killed? Or did she find freedom? By 1941, at the height of the London Blitz, Veronique had spent almost a year as a Soho sex worker. Although she wouldn't know it, as with her skin growing ever paler and more haggard, she rarely saw daylight. This was her life. Wake, wash, fuck, cry, pray in secret, drink herself to sleep, rinse, and repeat. She couldn't go to the police as she spoke very little English. She had no papers. She was here illegally. And if she was arrested, she risked being deported back to France, which was under the Nazis' control. She lived in a world of despair and blackness, with no joy and love, just an existence of hurt. But she did have one friend. Having been a prostitute herself, Manon was a maid in the late 60s, whose job it was to tidy the room, clean the sheets, replace the condoms, and nurse the girls' bruises when they were attacked by their punters or punished by their pimps. She wasn't French, but she had been a maid to enough French women over the years to pick up the lingo. So when times were quiet, they chatted. It made for a brief moment in a horrible day, which made Veronique feel normal again, and maybe even human. With her highlight being to go shopping with Manon at the Rupert Street market, or Compton Street, or Piccadilly. It made her smile and it gave her hope. But seeing couples walking hand in hand, kissing, with kids running about their feet, it also reminded her of the life she had lost and may never have. But all that would change, and not in a good way. As a risk of her enforced occupation, Veronique got pregnant. Whether by a split condom, a punter who paid to go bareback, or being raped by Frank. But decades before the pill was commonly available to the average woman, pregnancy could be a death sentence, especially for someone like Veronique. She wasn't allowed to stop selling sex during her pregnancy, as to her pimp, time was money, and she was his cash cow. For a while, she may have been sold as a fetish to perverts, but even though she was just a child herself, with a baby in her belly, that didn't stop the drunks from abusing her, the woman haters from hitting her, or the sadists from strangling her for their own sexual satisfaction. Whether she wanted to keep the baby or not, it wasn't her choice, as her body wasn't hers, it was his. She knew she couldn't flee, as she knew no one, had no money, and had nowhere to go, and knew he wouldn't let her keep it, as the baby would ruin her body, and if she did give birth, he would probably sell it. Like her, the baby was a nothing, a nobody, an annoying impediment to Frank's business. And with an illegal abortion planned, this would mean she would be unable to earn for him for a few days, and with the abortion being added to her ever-escalating debts, Veronique was further from freedom. Sometime late in 1941, the abortion was arranged. A doctor of dubious credentials arrived at the flat. His unsuitable tools were sterilized in boiling water. His fee was paid. An agreement would be made in which he would be protected from any prosecution if anything went wrong, as he had value, but she did not. And if she happened to die owing to blood loss or infection, her body would be dumped like rubbish. No one would be arrested, even if her remains were found. But the abortion had failed. Frank was furious, not at the doctor who he would use again, but Veronique, whose pregnancy had cost him time, money, and tested his patience. Needing a cheap and proven method to abort this parasite, and dismissing the old wives' tales of hot baths and neat gin to force a miscarriage, he chose a way which, from his experience, he knew never failed, even if it risked her life. Frank beat her, black and blue. In the quiet of that dingy little room where nightly Veronique was raped, he rained down fists upon her. For several minutes he pummeled her, trying to avoid her face and breasts, not out of any compassion, but business acumen. And although everyone on the street knew what he was doing and why, the locals simply hung their heads in shame and went about their duties, too afraid to speak up. Later that day, a dead fetus was aborted into a waste bucket and disposed of. Veronique was in a bad way, broken and bloody. The worst that Manon had seen in all the years that she'd witnessed the brutality of the pimps. And although the same abortionist was called back to check that his patient wasn't about to die, he wouldn't be there to nurse her back to health, as that cost money. Manon was free, and it was her job, but she also did it because this was her friend. Veronique was bedbound for days, if not weeks. Slowly the cuts stopped weeping, the bruises healed, and although possible cracks and fractures to her ribs meant that this young girl came precariously close to death, somehow she made it through. But once she was back on her feet, Frank put her back to work. The Christmas of 1941 was cold and bleak. A hard frost had ravaged the streets. A bitter wind howled down the alleys. But still, warmed by great lugs of whiskey, an endless slew of drunks lined up to pump a pretty young thing with their pointless little winkies as their festive pay packets burned a hole in their pockets. As always, Frank was getting fat on her earnings. But she saw very little of it, owing to her debt, the rent of the room, and the cost of the abortion, which meant she would probably never escape. Veronique was also earning less, a lot less, as although Frank had tried to avoid punching her face, her cheek was bruised and swollen like an old piece of beef, and still aching from the severe beating to her belly and ribs. Every time a punter pumped her just a little too hard, she winced in pain. Gone was the dead-eyed stare, as now she grimaced and groaned, which the boys said, "Put me off my stroke." Even drunks wouldn't pump broken goods, and they certainly weren't willing to pay for it. So for a while Frank worked out what to do with her, Veronique became a maid like Manon. She cooked, cleaned and fetched, but earned a fraction of the pittance she once had. In the mornings she washed the sheets, cleaned the toilet, shopped for bread, milk and powdered eggs, and although she rarely spoke, this tragic little girl was seen limping around town, wheezing like an asthmatic crone. But sometime in the new year, it was then that she saw a face that she recognized and liked. Stan was 16. He was a quiet boy, a little shy, who had visited her a few times before. The first time he said nothing. He just sat on the edge of the bed, unable to look at her. He paid, and then red-faced he ran. The second time, he smiled and apologized, not that she understood him. But he didn't want sex, he just wanted to cuddle. Some men do that, being drunk and unable to get it up. But he was sober, lonely, and he just wanted to be held. The third time, they cuddled again. They held hands, they smiled, and he even bought her a little flower. It had been a while since anyone except Manon had been nice to her. At first it felt odd, as if it was a trap. But she knew he was good, she knew he was nice, and she knew that she could trust Stan. In a different world, at a different moment in time, they could have been sweethearts. Seeing the love he had in his eyes for her, every so often she caught a glimpse of how her life could be, happy, loved, and free. Across the hour, maybe less that they spent together, they barely shared a word. And although in him she saw hope, as this small polite boy invited her for tea and cake, she was too nervous to accept. Frank was watching. Frank was always watching. In February 1942, the front door of the brothel on Rupert Street was splintered by a blue helmeted hulk swinging an oversized axe. As black boots broke it down, a buzz of coppers swarmed every floor, arresting clients, assaulting sex workers, smashing everything they saw, and seizing any cash as evidence. Never to be seen again until the inspector brought her round to the pub and each of the boys got a bonus for a job well done. Frank wasn't arrested, as he wasn't there. Pimps rarely are. And neither was Veronique. As a bruised and some say unsightly girl who no one was willing to pay to poke, Veronique was doing the laundry when the brothel was raided. And even though this could have easily been a shakedown by the cops for cash, or maybe Frank had forgotten to pay someone off, she was the one he would blame. Why? Because of Stan. It was said that Stan was seen talking to a copper, and that his uncle was a policeman, none of which could be verified. and with Veronique conveniently missing where the brothel was raided, even though she always did the laundry at that same hour. She was blamed, beaten again, and with more bruises to her face, wheezing to her lungs, and cracks to her aching ribs. She was now even more useless as a sex worker, and with her looks gone and her never-ending debts impossible to pay off, she was as good as dead. She saw Stan once more, laying rat traps in the alley by the shop where he worked. He hadn't spoken to her for weeks. He often changed direction when he saw her walking towards him, and she wondered what she'd done wrong. Had he gone off her, or was he hurt by her rejection of his invite to tea and cake? But it was as she caught his gaze that she realized why he was avoiding her. His eye was black and swollen. As far as we know, they never saw each other again, and the flower he gave her wilted and died. Her short and tragic life was coming to an end. She was alone and frightened in a dangerous and cruel world with no friends or family, and she lived in a vicious circle of pain and fear. She was a nobody, a nothing, a faceless, nameless girl who'd been isolated further from any chance of hope. Every day she wondered if this was her last, and with Frank still deciding what to do with her, maybe he would sell her off or dispose of her. And as a corpse in a river or a body part on a bomb site, being a prostitute, the police would probably assume she was killed by a client, and with that, the case would be closed. Veronique was a ghost awaiting her second death, and she knew she would never be free. But she still had a friend, Manon, the mother figure she so badly needed, who knew that Veronique was a child in need of protection. And as an experienced maid and ex-sex worker, she'd seen this before. Frank was always watching, but he wasn't watching Manon and the other girls who sold sex in Soho. If Veronique packed a bag, he would know. If she squirreled away some money, he would know. If she wore too many clothes on a warm day, he would know. He had eyes, ears, and people who worked for him. He could be in a million places at once, and he knew everything that happened, even when he was asleep. But Manon knew what to do. These girls would have put the spies of the Special Operations Executive to shame with their cunning and bravery. With a series of well-timed distractions, whether fights, fires, thefts, or tantrums which drew attention. When they could, a girl slipped away, and in an alley, hidden in a gutter pipe or behind a loose brick, they stashed something to get Veronique as far and as fast away as possible. An envelope of money, bag of clothes, a box of food, or a list of train times. Just like the Great Escape. On a March morning, Veronique, wearing nothing out of the ordinary and carrying nothing suspicious, left the brothel on Rupert Street with 2 large bags of dirty bedsheets. Nursing a pronounced limp, she walked her usual route to the laundry, stopping every so often near a gutter pipe or a loose brick as her wheezing lungs made her slow. And having got her wind back, she headed towards Piccadilly Circus. She had everything she needed to vanish and be gone forever. But Frank was watching. He was always watching. And as a myriad of strangers' eyes seemed to scan her suspiciously, as she stood, sweating and shaking, how far could this sick girl get? South London, the South Coast, or France? And even if she managed to flee her violent pimp, if she made it all the way back to her homeland, she risked extermination by the Nazis. Veronique didn't leave. She did her laundry. She limped back to Rupert Street and stopped at every gutter pipe and loose brick on her way. And maybe one day, when she was fitter, she would try again. Maybe, but maybe not. Whether Frank saw, heard, or knew of her escape attempt can never be known. But her life didn't get any easier. As again she was beaten, At least once she was raped to keep her in check. And when a bomb landed, not too far from Golden Square, eviscerating Manon and scattering her body so the only way to identify her was the charred remains of her handbag. It seemed as if Veronique had given up. Veronique became more of a ghost after the death of Manon. As far as we know, she rarely left the brothel. She never smiled or spoke. She cooked, she cleaned, and she became the new maid. But this isn't where her story ends, as what happened to her is a mystery. On an unspecified date in March or April 1942, having made Frank's dinner and watched him gorge himself silly on suet pudding, as she washed up the crockery, Frank began to sweat. He felt giddy and nauseous, and although her cooking was half decent, he began to puke like he had never puked before. Somehow, rat poison had got into the pie mix, and with common brands having a bitter but slightly sweet and nutty flavour to lure in the rodents, he didn't realise that he was dying until he felt an intense burning in his throat, a boiling in his stomach, and hot acid-like tears rolling from his bright red eyes. And as much as Frank pleaded for Veronique to help him as he got even sicker and weaker, she just stood there, staring, doing nothing. And with a Gallic shrug, she muttered, "Je ne comprends pas." With him pale and his eyes rolling into the back of his head, this was her one chance to escape his prison. Only Frank didn't die. Fate can be cruel. Somehow he survived, and Veronique vanished. With Manon dead and Stan laying low, although some of the girls saw that Veronique was missing and that the maid had been swiftly replaced, no one else really noticed, as the girl with the pronounced limp and the eternal frown was never seen again. It's uncertain what happened to her. One theory was that with the beatings cracking her ribs, she'd died of pneumonia, but as no one knew her name, the death certificate may have read unknown. A second theory, as it happened to Manon, was that all that remained of her was that she was one of thousands of unclaimed body parts in a London morgue, having been victim to one of London's blitz bombs which had decimated the city. A third was that she was dead, having been killed by Frank, chopped up, scattered across the rivers, drains and bomb sites of London, with the police classifying the case as just another dead prostitute, one of many found in the years before and after the Black-Eyed Ripper and other sadists of his ilk. But there was also a fourth theory, one more hopeful than the others, but also more fanciful. But that doesn't mean it didn't happen. Some believe that Veronique escaped. Some believe she made it to Piccadilly Circus and hopped on the first tube out of the city. And some believe that the only reason Frank never spoke about her and denied ever knowing where she was because she had bested him. It was said she had gone to the coast. She had made a good life for herself by the seaside, and with no ferries for civilians travelling between England and France until the war was over, that it was then that she finally went home. But life isn't a fairy tale, and it certainly isn't fair. So although we all hope that she made it out safe and got everything that she deserved, she could easily have been arrested, deported, and convicted as a potential spy. The truth about Veronique will never be known, as over the decades, most of what was remembered about her tragic life has become a pale imitation of the truth. But there is one theory that many still cling to, as when the girls went back to the gutter pipe and the loose brick, the bag and the box were gone. So there we go, folks. A little story there that I've been working on for a long time. I think as we go through Murder Mile, I think at the start I always felt that I had to have all the information and everything was there. But I think the longer I go through these stories, the more I realise that sometimes there's interesting stories out there that need to be told. You're not always going to get all the information, but there are ways to tell people's stories. And this was one that I've been sitting on for a long time and never really knew how to tell it. And then I think as I was doing the research for welcome to Extra Mile, the unscripted, unedited bit. Sorry, I forgot to say that. I haven't done this for a while. As I was going through the Hammersmith Nudes, the Jack the Stripper, and we were kind of diving into the idea of the fact that a lot of prostitutes are kind of threatened by their pimps and are essentially, I'm just going to open a window, essentially prisoners